Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining another episode of Stewarts Soundbites. This week I'm joined by Phill Gill, who is the Managing Director of PLG. For those of you who don't know, PLG are a disability property specialists. So I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, Phill, but I think that PLG manage pretty much everything from the initial search to acquisition to adaptations, to post completion support, everything. So huge wide-ranging service. But today we thought we'd talk a little bit about rental properties, because we talk an awful lot about purchasing properties and adapting properties, but actually in reality renting a property in the first instance is often what happens. And I think, Phill, you'll probably agree that rentals for people who have sustained catastrophic injuries are generally viewed as a bit of a nightmare for lots of different reasons for some people. And I'll be the first to admit that when you think about rentals and people that have catastrophic injuries, you often think, well, there are going to be quite a lot of challenges. There's a lot to do, and a purchase and an adaptation, a bespoke adaptation is the dream, and it is the dream. And that's the ultimate goal for most of our clients is to purchase and adapt, a permanent home that caters for their needs. However, that obviously takes time and it takes money. And money isn't always available for people who don't have claims or pre-settlement of cases, where there isn't money available. So I think there's, for me, Phill, there's sometimes a sense of kind of anxiety and a bit of panic in trying to find a rental property for someone who has extensive needs. And I think that sometimes people feel that they have to have a rental property it'll do, and we'll just have to get over it. Is it true then that, do you think that for most people they end up having to settle for a property that's just okay, or does the perfect rental property exist?
I don't think the perfect property for anybody exists. Generally, if you're buying something, you'll tweak it to be how you want it to be, so it meets your criteria. And because somebody's had a life-changing injury, I don't think things need to change as far as that's concerned. To talk about the purchase side of things, we've always had the view that yes, that has to be the ultimate aim, but it takes a long time to get that right. So if we're talking to somebody initially about purchasing a property, so doing a purchase search, I will always set aspirations at 2 years from today. If the initial meeting's today, don't expect to be living in it or handed over the keys for 2 years, because you've got to find one. You've got a conveyancing process. I was talking to an agent today who's already got deals that he's doing right now, and the lawyers are telling him they don't think they'll get them through by the end of the stamp duty holiday, which I find astonishing, because that's still 4 months away. So there's that process. Then you've got to, when you've found the property, you've got to do the design, you've got to get the planning, you've got to do the tender, then you've got to find a builder, and you've got to build it. It just goes on and on and on.
It's huge, yeah.
It's huge. Whereas with a rental, what we always say is you get an opportunity to try before you buy. With a personal injury client, it's Joe Average has gone to work on his bike, been hit by a lorry, and he's never going home again. It really is that dramatic, as we all know. So finding a rental for that person, so that they can go straight into that from hospital as soon as they're in the right condition to be released, is really important. Because I think we're a nation of homeowners, Englishman's home is his castle and all that. I think we've got a conditioning against rentals, so there's almost a bit of a stigma against it to start with.
Yeah.
But if it can be badged as an opportunity to try before you buy, as I say, then people are getting used to and I hate this phrase, especially this year, but getting used to the new normal, getting used to a new way of living. Because as you will know, once they do get the money to spend on a property, they get one pot of money. Once that money's spent, it can't be spent again. So if they don't get the design of the kitchen right, or the bathroom right, or the location's not quite right, they can't go back to the defendants and say, we messed up there, is there any chance of some more money? It's when you've got it and you spent it, it's gone. So what we look to try and do is to take into account that they're going to be living in a property for a couple of years, give them an opportunity to put care regime in place, therapy regimes in place. So we'll often be suggesting slightly larger properties than people would otherwise perhaps look for. Quite often clients don't realise and appreciate the level of space that they need. So when they're in a, say, a hospital environment, and quite often we're called in a very early stage, and I'll go and, or my colleagues will go and speak to clients in hospital and talk about things. You know, there is this tendency to want to make do, that people will say what they've got to say to get out of that place as quickly as possible, and it's really about teaching people to live in new surroundings, trying to, you know, give them the benefit of the experience that we've gained over quite a long period of time, and utilize that to best effect. So yeah, I think once you can get people thinking in the right way about a rental property, then they can, you know, learn to live with it a bit better, I guess. You know, as you say, the perfect property doesn't exist, but you can certainly create a better situation than they would probably get by staying in the current house. One of the things that we also spend a lot of time talking to people about, obviously the claim is about the claimant for obvious reasons. So when we're talking to people like yourself, it's very much focused on the claimant. But I always think, you know, people live where they live for a reason. You know, they've got mates across the road or around the corner, or granny and granddad live up the road, or the good school is just around the corner for the eldest child, and they want the youngest child to go to the same school. So whilst the claim doesn't always cater to a particular degree for everybody else, we think those things need to be factored in. So as long as we're not doing things that compromises the claim, then, you know, you think about where little Johnny plays football or little Jenny goes to netball, as well as what's right for the client. So there is a bit of science to it in terms of looking at locations and how we use Rightmove and the other portals, as well as, you know, in areas where we've done a lot of searches. We also know now, having done so many, the agents that you do want to go to, as much as the agents that you don't want to go to that don't get it, or will not be responsive to what we're trying to do.
I think that's a really interesting point, actually, and having those relationships already established, people like you, I mean, it's useful to have that kind of catalogue of knowledge. And I think the point that you made earlier about people having kind of an aversion to rental anyway is really interesting. Not something I've applied my mind to particularly, but I think that's right, especially amongst older people who've maybe paid off their house, or they, you know, and they find it very difficult to accept that isn't is no longer a choice for them to live in a pre-accident home. I think it's really hard. And just going back a little bit, Phil, thinking about the initial considerations, when a case manager or family members are looking at rental properties and thinking about the search, are there any kind of key initial considerations? I mean, you've already talked about, you know, the geographical location. Are we close to grandma, and are we near the school and whatever? Are there any other sort of key considerations for people in searching for rentals, and how crucial is it really to act very quickly?
It's essential to act quickly and be geared up to act quickly. You know, we sometimes get instructions and lawyers haven't got the right level of interim payment. You know, I've just done an appraisal this morning for a client in the West Country, and done an appraisal on not just the rental costs, but the cost of the adaptations. We always advocate a 2-year tenancy, but we pretty much on every one get a tenant only break clause after 12 months. So if for any reason the tenant, the client or the family don't like where they are, they can get out after 12 months, but it doesn't give the landlord the opportunity to give you notice. And we sometimes get emergency calls where a rental property has been found by somebody else, and they've spent a load of money on getting it right, because these things aren't cheap. They're getting more expensive by the week with construction costs rising. So, you know, day one of 12 months starts and they start the work. The family might not move in until 4 months down the line. They live in it for 4 months and they get notice from the landlord or what have you that he wants it back at the end of the 12 months. So it's a huge amount of money spent for little reward. So we always make sure the tenant has got the option to give notice so that they know where they are for 2 years. So important.
Yeah, that sort of thing. I will avoid a lot of stress presumably as well. How you mentioned there talking about rentals and then adaptations, and it's rarely the case that somebody with a catastrophic injury can move into a normal rental without having to make any adaptations. In your experience, how do landlords feel about adaptations generally speaking, and how much of a barrier is it to them agreeing to rentals, and of course the reinstation of the property at the end to its original state? How much of a barrier is that?
It can be a big barrier, but I think we call it getting over the hump. Once you get the agent on board and then get the landlord on board, it should generally be plain sailing. But the education process starts, at the very first point of contact. So we've got pages on our website that we guide the agents to at the very first point that we make the inquiry. Have you got anything in a particular area that explains what we do? So by the time we found the property, hopefully, and speaking as an estate agent, they don't always grasp what you're saying to them as a potential client, but hopefully they've understood it. So it's not a surprise that we want to do some work. It can sometimes be a surprise to the landlord, but it's about making sure that they know that the works are being fully supervised, they're being organised by an architect. It's not just us on a whim ripping out a bathroom and turning it into a wet room. We have clauses that we add to the tenancy agreements that protect both the landlord and the tenant. We also do a schedule, and I would recommend anybody does this. You do a schedule of works that you're planning to do on the way in. And if you think you might need a hoist or something else at a later stage, add that to that schedule and explain that you might want to do it, but you might not need to do it. And as much important as anything else is a schedule of what you're planning to do in terms of reinstatement on the way out. So everybody knows what they're getting into and everybody knows what they're getting out of. And it makes it a much more solid process. You mentioned reinstatement, and it doesn't happen as often as you would think. So we always try and design any works with reinstatement in mind. And once you've got the landlord on board, then quite often we'll have situations where the agent's got confidence in us that they don't see us as a threat. We're there to help them get the deal over the line. A lot of the time we'll negotiate directly with the landlord. We'll meet with the landlord, or one of our architects will meet with the landlord and work with him, explain what he's done. We can show them images of things that have been done previously. And quite often we can achieve something that meets the needs of the client, and the landlord just leaves things in situ at the end. So all we're removing then are the sort of temporary ramps and those sort of things at the end of the tenancy. So it reduces the cost for the claimant, and by association, it reduces the cost for the defendant, and makes it a much more simple process, because it's painful to spend 30, 40, 50k or whatever it is on spent doing all this work to a property to then rip it out 2 years later. So quite often we've got landlords and tenants choosing jointly finishes for bathrooms and that sort of thing. So
I was going to say, I can imagine quite a few landlords.
Sorry?
Yeah, I can imagine quite a few landlords saying, actually, I quite like this wet room. It's it adds value to their property as well. And you've mentioned already, Phil, you've touched on the kind of tenancy agreements. What are the most common sort of problems that arise when you're negotiating these tenancy agreements for complex disability rentals? Should we do a separate soundbite on that?
Sure, you could quite easily. Tenancy agreements vary dramatically. You know, I did have a very respected lawyer say to me once, I don't know why you're spending so much time on it, because every tenancy agreement is the same. And, you know, I didn't say, and I should have done at the time, well, they're just not. You know, we dealt with a big high street, high-end agency that everybody will have heard of up and down the country. And in the space of about 6 months, we did 4 deals with different offices of this big firm of estate agents, and every single tenancy agreement was different. You know, you know, it's a respected firm. It's not some backstreet agency.
Yeah.
And when we quite often have to work with the compliance department of a particular firm or whatever, we pointed this out to them on the 4th time. I said, look, we should let them know, because they probably don't know that they've got different tenancy agreements, and they didn't. You know, they assumed that everyone was using one particular agreement, and they weren't. So we go through things thoroughly. A lot of firms of lawyers have their own property team that do it. We employ our company lawyer at our cost to check every single agreement, because I want to make sure that if you're coming to me with a client, the advice I'm giving you is robust. So whilst we've got lots of experience, we still make sure there's an extra check that ensures that we're not getting into something that we shouldn't be.
Yeah. And I'm going to wrap us up now, Phil, in a little minute, but because as usual, I'm cross with myself for setting these at 15 minutes, because I could talk about this all day. But we've talked a little bit about the kind of obstacles that there are in terms of rental properties, and we've touched very briefly upon how this could actually be. Rentals are often a real opportunity for clients that we deal with to trial their permanent living situation and trial their permanent living environment, and their therapy teams, and how all of that works over a couple of years. Do you think that's the most that's the biggest opportunity for clients to see their rental properties in that way?
Yeah, I would say that's the most important thing, because people, you know, pre-accident weren't having therapists come into the house. They weren't needing therapy space at home, and they weren't needing a large bathroom with, you know, all the facilities that our clients do need. And it takes a lot of getting used to. You know?
Yeah, it's a huge shock, isn't it, for most people?
The other thing also, which I think does get overlooked quite often, is it demonstrates the need. So instead of, you know, you've got an expert's report that says Mr. Brown might need this level of therapy or this level of care, you know, you can demonstrate it's actually working, you know, and that makes a massive difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, Phil, I'm really sad to say that our time is up, but I thank you so much for all of your brilliant insights in this area. Maybe we'll rope you in for another episode down the line on
No
something
problem.
else.
Okay.
But I'm very grateful, and it's been really interesting. What I'm going to do is, at the end of this, there'll be a slide will come up, and on that slide, I'll link up the details for PLG. They've got a number of really interesting articles about rentals and about a whole host of different things. So we'll link up those to the slide at the end. And if anybody has any questions, I know that we don't have time to deal with questions in the session, but if anybody has any questions arising from the session or anything that we've discussed, please feel free to send them on to me. I can liaise with Phil later, and we'll try and get a response to you. And as ever, thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.